Good afternoon. Welcome to Wisconsin Facets webinar on extended school year. Today is April 12, 2017, and we have invited Ms. Sarah Alcancourt to present, and she is one of the consultants or the school administration consultants of the special education team in DPI. So Sarah, if you would like to mention what do you do in DPI and you can start the presentation, that'll be great. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for hosting this event, and thank you to Facets for having me. Again, my name is Sarah Concourt. I'm on the special education team at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I am a school administration consultant. I do a variety of things at the department, including the resident expert for extended school year, which is why I'm here today. I'm also on the procedural compliance work group. I also investigate complaints, and then I have also a variety of other areas that I monitor, such as RCC, residential treatment centers, day treatment centers, foster care. I look over a 2R charter grant that's primarily located in the Milwaukee area. I do a lot of work with the new special education directors in the state of Wisconsin. In addition, I also look over and help assist with some of the areas with open enrollment and special education vouchers. So at the department, we have a tendency to sort of break up the big areas that we feel are significant need and also follow under the IDEA law. So by having other people or having people on our team as the quote resident experts, that's a way for us to kind of spread ourselves out and build capacity likewise. So for this particular webinar, I'm going to be focusing on extended school year. If you do have questions about other areas that I have expertise in, or you have other questions around IDEA, I'm happy to answer those at another time if they're outside the ESY. And my contact information is on the very last slide. So feel free at any time if you have questions, shoot me an email, and I do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. So here we are talking about extended school year. And as we said in the beginning, if you have questions, I would prefer not to answer specific case questions at the end just because of confidentiality. If you have a general question at the end, I'm happy to answer that. But if you have a case-specific situation, I'm happy to do that via phone or email after this webinar. So right now, what we're going to go through some of the basics of IDEA law and then get into the ESY component. So special education is governed by many levels of laws and regulations. So this is what we look at the department, and we really follow the federal statute of IDEA law. We also use the federal regulations and the comments for guidance, as well as Wisconsin statute, Wisconsin administrative code, case law, hearing decisions, and then those complaints that I talked about that I'm very involved with investigating, as well as other people on my team. IEPs, as we all know, are legal requirements. The IEP is a legal document that describes the student's free appropriate public education that we say, or that we use short term of FAPE, which is a written statement of a written statement for a child with a disability that is developed and implemented in accordance with IDEA. So who is entitled to FAPE? All qualified persons with disabilities within a jurisdiction of a school district are entitled to a free appropriate public education. The Ed Section 504 regulation defines person with a disability as any person who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such impairment. For elementary and secondary education programs, a qualified person with a disability is a person with a disability who is of an age during which mandatory under state law to provide such services to persons with disabilities, of an age during which persons without a disability are provided such services, or entitled to a free and appropriate public education under IDEA. In general, all school-age children who are individuals with disabilities are defined by Section 504, and IDEA are entitled to FAPE. An appropriate public education will include education services designed to meet the individual education needs of a student with a disability as adequately as the needs of the non-disabled students are met. The education of a student with a disability with non-disabled students to maximize the extent appropriate to the needs of a student with a disability. Evaluation and placement procedures established to guard against misclassification or inappropriate placement of students, and a periodic reevaluations of students who have been provided special educations or related services and establishment of due process procedures that enable parents and guardians to receive the required notices, review their child's record, and challenge identification, evaluation, and placement decisions. To be appropriate, education programs for a student with a disability must be designed to meet their individual needs to the same extent that the needs of non-disabled students are met. An appropriate education may include regular special education and related services and services to accommodate the unique needs of individuals with disabilities. One way to ensure that programs meet individual needs is through the development of an individualized education program, an IEP, for each student with a disability. IEPs are required for students participating in special education programs of recipients of funding under IDEA. The quality of education services provided to students with disabilities must equal the quality of services provided to non-disabled students. Students and teachers with disabilities must be trained in the instruction of individuals with disabilities. Faculties must also be comparable, and appropriate materials and equipment must also be available. Students with disability may be excluded from participating in non-academic services and extracurricular activities on the basis of the disability. Students with disabilities may not be excluded from participating in non-academic services and extracurricular activities on the basis of the disabilities. Persons with disabilities must be provided an opportunity to participate in non-academic services that equal to the provided to the persons without a disability. These services may include physical education and recreational athletics, transportation, health service, recreational activities, special interest groups or clubs sponsored by the school, and referrals to agencies that provide assistance to persons with disabilities and employment to students. IEP participants. So who's included in the IEP team?
Sarah? Hi. If we move the slides, probably.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you know, you can, if you might be able to slow down a little bit.
Sure.
Thanks so much.
You know what? I can't, for some reason, I can't advance my slides. It won't let me. Did you hear me or no? Oh.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I am going to, hold on. Just 1 second. Can you see the okay, so let's try again. So
there we go.
Okay, thank you so much. I apologize for
that. No. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can. I can see your legal requirements now.
Yep, and now I'm going to the IEP portion. Thank you. I apologize. All right, so who exactly makes up the IEP team? So the IEP participants, each IEP team must consist of the following. The parents of the child. We know that's extremely important. Schools must take steps to ensure one or both of the parents are at the IEP team meeting or have the opportunity to participate, including notifying the parents of the meeting early enough to ensure that they have the opportunity to attend, and scheduling the meeting at a mutually agreeable time and place. The participants in a meeting to develop the student's IEP must consider as appropriate whether a child needs ESY services in order to receive FAPE. The IEP team participants. The IEP team meeting may be conducted without the parent participation if the school is unable to convince the parents that they should participate. The school must have a record of at least 3 good faith attempts to reach the parent. Examples of this could include telephone calls and the results of those calls, correspondence sent to the parents and responses that they received, and records of visits to the parents and the results of those visits. Please remember, too, that if the parent cannot physically attend the IEP team meeting, the parent is equal participant if they are on the phone during the IEP team meeting. IEP team participants. Each IEP team must consist of the following. At least one regular education teacher of that child. Again, I'm going to repeat. At least one regular education teacher of that child is or may be participating in the regular education environment. At least one special education teacher who has recent training or experience related to the child's known or suspected area of special education needs, or where appropriate, at least one special education provider of the child. A representative of the local educational agency, often called the LEA representative, who is qualified to provide or supervise the provision of special education, knowledgeable about the general education curriculum, and knowledgeable about the authorized to commit to the available resources of the local educational agency. And sometimes the LEA person may wear two hats, so it may be the speech and language pathologist may also be acting as the LEA. A lot of times it might be the special education director, it may be the assistant principal, it may be the principal. So, but the LEA can also be one or more of the other people on the team. An individual also who that can interpret the instructional implications of the evaluation results. So someone who can interpret what the evaluation states. And then at the discretion of the parent or the LEA, other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise about the child, including related services personnel as appropriate. It is up to the parent or the LEA to determine whether someone has special education expertise about the child. All participants in the IEP team meeting, including these other individuals, are equal participants in the consensus-based decision-making process. If consensus decision cannot be made that all can live with, the LEA responsible to develop an IEP then ensures the child to receive FAPE. If the parent disagrees, they can follow their due process options, including informal dispute resolutions, such as mediation, state IDEA complaints, and so on. And then whenever appropriate, the child. So be careful about this area. It's often appropriate for the child to attend at least part of the IEP team meeting, especially if the child is over the age of 13 or 14 and talking about transition. All right, so let's get into the meat of this webinar. So what are ESY services? School districts must provide each resident child with a disability a free appropriate public education, which we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. In order to provide a FAPE, districts must ensure all children with disabilities receive special education and related services consistent with the provision of their IEPs. Special education and related services provided to the IEP beyond the limits of the school year term are ESY services. ESY services are required special education and related services provided beyond the limits of the school term in accordance with the student's IEP and at no cost to the parent. These services are necessary in order to provide a free, appropriate public education. There are no state regulations addressing when a child needs ESY services, but there are federal regulations that specifically address ESY services. The federal regulations state ESY services must be provided when a child's IEP team determines that the services are necessary for the provision of FAPE. The regulations state a school district cannot limit ESY services to a particular category of disability or limit the amount, type, or duration of the services. Additionally, there have been several court cases which have provided guidance in this area. In these cases, the key issues are generally skill regression during the break in services and limited skill recovery after services resume. Therefore, it is reasonable for ESY services to concentrate on skill regression and recovery problems. As a result, ESY services may differ from services from the regular school term. The school district may not limit the type, amount of duration of those services, and is not a one-size-fits-all approach. But some types of disabilities may demand ESY services more frequently than others of disabilities in practice. This would result from an individualized review and determination. The services are individualized based on the student's needs and will vary. They could include physical therapy, behavioral support, instructional services, take-home packages for parental implementation with consultation services, coaching, small group instruction, just to name a few. ESY does not support the learning of new skills, but the retention of those already taught. Districts will vary in their form of services that are offered. Special education related services are provided in accordance to the IEP beyond the limits of the school term are ESY services. So what is a school term? Wisconsin Statute 115 has defined a school term as the time commencing with the first day of school and ending at the last day of school, that the schools of the district are in operation for attendance of pupils in a school year other than for the operation of summer classes. Although ESY services are typically provided during the summer months, there is nothing that will limit a school district from providing these services during times other than in the summer. Services must be provided in accordance with the IEP. A school district is required to provide ESY services to a child when it requires services such as FAPE to receive FAPE. If the child requires ESY services to receive FAPE, the school district must develop an IEP for the child that includes ESY services. These requirements apply to all children with disabilities between the ages of 3 and 21 who have not yet graduated from high school. This district is not required to consider ESY services for each child at every IEP meeting. If ESY services are an issue raised by the parent or another IEP team member, the IEP meeting participants must determine whether the child receives ESY services in order to receive FAPE. So that's extremely important. It does not always have to be addressed at every single IEP meeting or for every single child. However, if the parent does bring it up or another IEP team member brings it up, it must be considered and talked about in order to determine whether the child requires ESY services in order to receive FAPE. If the child may need extended school year services, the IEP team needs to discuss it. The IEP team decides if a child needs ESY services. ESY is not just for children with certain disabilities. A child may need ESY services one year and then not the next. The IEP team looks at all appropriate factors. The IEP team considers whether the child's gains made during the regular school year are threatened if the LEA does not give ESY services. The IEP team should look at, and this is just a few things that they can consider, the extent of the disability, the extent of the skills lost or may be lost, the time needed to relearn the skills, whether the parents can help, so that's what I talked about earlier about the take-home packets, how quickly the child learns, skills that are just being introduced, the child's behavior and physical needs, emerging skills, and then the other appropriate factors. If the child may need extended school year, the IEP team needs to discuss it. The IEP team just decides if the child needs ESY services. ESY is not just for children with certain disabilities. A child may need ESY services one year and not the next. This list is not all the things that the IEP team has to consider, and a child does not need to meet every single one of the items above. Not one item controls the decision. ESY services are not always the same from one year to the next and may not look exactly the same as the regular school year services. Sometimes just related services such as occupational therapy or physical therapy, and given in a variety of places such as the home, school, or community. And then determining the need for ESY services. Factors to be considered when determining the need for ESY services: regression, slow recoupment, predictive data, and all other appropriate factors. Regression and recruitment. The IEP determines whether these skills and services, there is a likelihood of substantial regression of critical life skills caused by a school break, and a failure to recover these lost skills in a reasonable amount of time following the school break. It is noted that some regression in skills typically occur with all students during school breaks, but such losses would not be considered substantial. The degree of progress. The IEP team reviews the student's progress toward the IEP goals on critical life skills and determines whether, without these services, the student's degree or rate of progress toward these goals, or objectives and benchmarks if required, will significantly jeopardize the student's receipt of benefit for his or her educational program and placement during the regular school year. Other factors to consider. The student's ability. Other factors cited in this case include the ability of the child's parents to provide the educational structure at home, ability of the child to interact with children without disabilities, and areas of the child's curriculum which needs continuous attention. A child may be still eligible for ESY services even if there is no documentation of past regression or recruitment problems. If there is no data about regression, the child's need for ESY services may be shown by expert opinion or critical data established by the IEP team. The team should examine several factors: review the child's IEP goals or objectives and benchmarks if required, observation and data from the child's teachers, therapists, parents, and others who would have direct contact with the child before and during breaks in the educational programming, data and observations regarding the child's performance after long weekends, vacation, and past summer breaks, assessment of the child including pre-test and post-test data, curriculum-based assessments including pre-test and post-test data, and other relevant factors. The team must answer this question. Does the child need ESY services to receive a free, appropriate public education and to prevent the benefits received during the year from being jeopardized? These services provided by the local educational agency are distinct from the enrichment programs, summer school programs, and compensatory services and are not simply an extension of time. The consideration of ESY services is part of the IEP process. Historically, some have focused on ESY services primarily as a means to address regression recruitment issues. Recent case law developments have shown that ESY should be viewed more generally as a means to address the issue of FAPE. In other words, the focus of the IEP team should be on whether the student will receive FAPE if ESY services are not provided, and not merely on whether the student is entitled to ESY. The concept of regression may enter into the equation because unrecruitment regression over time may be evidence that FAPE is not being provided. The IEP team must determine whether the benefits a child gained during the regular school year will be significantly jeopardized if the student does not receive ESY. Based on this analysis, if ESY is determined to be required, these services are at no cost to the parent. Federal special education regulations and court cases establish a standard for determining whether a child is eligible for ESY services. Federal special education regulations require schools to provide ESY services as necessary to provide a child with FAPE. ESY services must be provided only if a child's IEP team determines on an individualized basis the services are necessary for providing FAPE to the child. Furthermore, the regulations specifically prohibit limiting ESY service to a particular categories of a disability or unilaterally limiting the type, amount, or duration of these services. In most cases, courts consider regression during the interruption in service and recoupment of skills after services resume in determining eligibility for ESY services. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes Wisconsin, has held that states should engage in a multifaceted determination of eligibility for ESY services, including the likelihood of regression, slow recruitment, and predictive data based on the opinion of the professionals. Accordingly, the department recommends that districts consider all appropriate factors in determining whether the benefits accrued to the child during the school year will be significantly jeopardized if the student is not provided ESY services. ESY services are intended to minimize the effects of regression recruitment problems. Therefore, it is reasonable for ESY services to concentrate on areas of regression and limited recruitment. Because the emphasis in ESY programming is on preventing regression recruitment problems, the ESY services may differ from the services provided to a child during the school term. The ESY services may or may not be school-based. The specific ESY services provided, including the amount and duration of the service, must be determined by the IEP team meeting participants and be based upon the individualized student's need. Any changes to the amount or duration of the ESY services must be made either through the IEP team meeting or if, after the annual IEP team meeting, the parent and district agree not to convene the IEP meeting and instead develop a written document to amend or modify the child's current IEP. While a child may not need ESY special education, a child may need ESY-related services in order to benefit from special education when the school resumes during the school term. In this instance, the related services may be the sole component of the ESY program. The decision whether the child should be provided related services as the sole component of the ESY program is the responsibility of the IEP team members. Those participants should consider whether, without such ESY-related services, there would be a regression recruitment problems in a child's special education program when the school year returns. The requirement regarding placement in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, during the normal school year applies to ESY services. The placement should be based on the IEP. If a proposed ESY placement might further isolate the student, the IEP team should consider whether an alternative is more appropriate for the student. However, the IEP team may determine in some cases that a more restrictive setting is necessary to provide FAPE. In determining the ESY services, the IEP team can consider flexibility in the delivery of services if the flexibility fulfills the needs of the student. While the school district must consider LRE, it is not required to create an artificial LRE setting during the ESY to meet the LRE requirements. A highly qualified teacher must provide the ESY services. The provision of ESY services in the prior year does not mean ESY services are needed in the current year. Similarly, the fact that no ESY services were provided in the prior year does not mean ESY services are not needed in the current year. When a school district receives a transfer student with a disability, the receiving district must provide services comparable to those described in the student's IEP until the new district either adopts the child's IEP from a previous agency or conducts an evaluation if determined necessary and develops and implements a new IEP. This requirement includes implementing IEP provisions relating to ESY services. This is a very hot topic between the difference of summer school versus ESY. Wisconsin State Statute 118 provides that school boards may elect to operate summer classes or permit pupils to attend summer classes operated by another district on tuition basis if the school district of operation will accept them. Also, the statute provides that compulsory attendance requirements does not apply to summer classes. A school district is not required to provide summer school programs. That's different than ESY. I just wanted to note that. So again, a school district is not required to provide a summer school program. Again, different than ESY. Summer school is a permissive program typically operated on a set schedule for a number of weeks during the summer. A child's IEP includes only those services required for the child to receive FAPE. If a child needs ESY in order to receive FAPE, such services must be articulated in the child's IEP. If the child does not require ESY services in order to receive FAPE, the IEP should not include the child's participation in permissive summer school classes. Making summer school classes available to children with disabilities does not relieve a school district of its obligation to consider, as appropriate and if necessary, provide ESY services. I'm going to say that again just so this is clear. Making summer school classes available to children with disabilities does not relieve a district of its obligation to consider, as appropriate and if necessary, to provide ESY services. For students with disabilities who do not qualify for extended school year, districts are required by Section 504 to make reasonable accommodations to enable the persons with disabilities must have the opportunity to participate. Districts must provide reasonable accommodations to give students with disabilities access unless those accommodations would fundamentally alter the nature of the summer program. Section 504 requires recipients to provide the students with disabilities appropriate to educational services designed to meet the individual needs of such students to the same extent as the needs of students without disabilities are met. An appropriate education for a student with a disability under Section 504 regulations could consist of education in regular classrooms, education in regular classes with supplementary services, and or special education related services. If the team determines that it is what a student needs to participate, that is what the district must provide. There are limitations if providing the accommodations would fundamentally alter the program, then they are not considered reasonable. ESY special education related services may be provided in the district summer school by staff who teach summer school classes. The ESY services must be tailored to the unique needs of the child and cannot be based solely on the availability of services during summer. The amount and duration of ESY services cannot be limited to the district's summer school schedule.